morning, everybody. Hey, this is just great day today. Today is the David Blackman Energy Questions podcast, and he has an absolutely all-star lineup. My name is Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group, and I'm here just to host. And David's going to try to keep me in line, but I'm not sure. Let's go ahead and go around the horn and start introducing our panelists. We've got Sarp Oskin, and I mean, Sarp is a VP over at one of the greatest companies in the world, and that is Enverus. Welcome. Thank you, Sarp.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And then we're coming around the horn, and we got Tim Stewart. He is a president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association. So we're so thrilled to have you here, your industry expertise and your opinions.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks.
And now, last but not least, the man of the hour and your podcast. This is David Blackman, outstanding author. He's on also an international podcast. He's also on another one called Three Podcasters Walk Into a Bar. So he's a multi-podcast kind of guy. So welcome, David.
But just to be clear, there's no drinking while we're taping that one. Thank you, Stu, and thank you, Sandstone Group, for hosting this show. And thank you to Enverus for being our sponsor. That's a really important thing to us, and we really do appreciate it. Guys, of course, we're here to talk today about the somewhat, well, I don't know, I won't say that, but what they're calling the Inflation Reduction Act that passed the Senate on a strictly partisan vote last Sunday, and has an awful lot related to energy language contained in it, and a lot of other stuff like hiring 87,000 additional IRS agents, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So thank you both for being here. There's a lot to get through on this thing, and I think what we'll do here is let's start with Sarp and give us Enverus's take on this bill and its potential impacts on not just oil and gas, but the overall energy space here in the United States.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of this, from our perspective, we believe that the benefits of this plan will come largely from tax breaks, meaning that the proposal aims to reduce the cost of renewable energy without necessarily burdening the cost of traditional energy. But surely in that process, of course, there is a shift in balance that occurs too, from that perspective. So I guess that's the burden from that perspective. But in effect, really the most important thing from a renewable and energy transition perspective is that the ambiguity around the tax credits afforded to technologies like wind, solar, and some new technologies like hydrogen storage, standalone storage, has kind of been removed. And that could be pretty great for the current adoption rates of those technologies, especially as the bill also increased those tax credits back to their regular levels and removed any phase out plans for at least the next decade.
On ambiguities, though, and you mentioned renewables and hydrogen, some of the others, but on electric vehicles, they actually added in some additional qualifiers, right? That mean that currently, I guess, I think Ford and GM both said that almost none of their electric vehicles would currently qualify. Talk about why that's the case in those particular subsidies.
Yeah, so for the EV piece, there has been some changes to how you're applicable to sort of that $7,500 tax credit, or possible $7,500 tax credit. And a lot of that is based on where the battery components are sourced, the price of the EV, and the taxpayer's income. Largely what you're referring to there goes to the idea of where the battery components are sourced. The battery components, most of those battery components do not currently exist. for us to be able to meet those goals in the United States. And those battery components are in places like China and the Democratic Republic of Congo, places that I wouldn't necessarily say are the most friendly places you would want your battery components to be sourced from, or at least call your supply of those components secure when they're there. So a lot of incentives have also been placed for advanced manufacturing and mining of those components in the United States within this bill, but it's going to take very long time before we're there, and it's unclear, actually very difficult, if not impossible, for us to actually make that happen. I mean, you need the reserves, you need the components to be competitive in terms of the broader market. You need your manufacturing to be competitive with the broader market, and with all of the limitations around prevailing wage, apprenticeship, domestic product in place, it becomes very difficult for us to see a path to being able to have those battery components sourced, qualifier met easily by many manufacturers.
Right. Tim, old friend, thank you for being here on the show. I really appreciate it. Tell us about, U.S. Oil and Gas Association. I was involved in it for years when I was in the industry. It's a wonderful, really effective trade group based in Washington with a unique membership. And I wonder how this bill and the feedback you're getting from your members on how some of the provisions in this bill is going to impact your companies.
Well, that's a great question, David. And, SARP really laid out this bill well. And I would characterize, I think my membership, David, it's characterized as it's a carrot and stick. And the other side gets the carrot, and my guys would get the stick. And so, I mean, U.S. Oil and Gas Association is the oldest trade association for the industry, going back to 1917. We've got members that are all across the spectrum on the E&P side. We have members who are doing onshore and offshore, doing federal and non-federal lands. And so our little group has probably the best sort of representation on the spectrum, I think, and can address these issues. The biggest impacts on this bill, I think, in the short term, David, are going to be those operators who are doing work on federal leases, particularly onshore. And this goes to the stick issue. The misunderstanding between the Democrats in Congress and the administration still is that they fail to understand that the federal leasing program is nothing more than a right to take a massive financial and regulatory risk.
Right.
There's no guarantee of success. And the problem is the other side approaches it as if we're going down to 7-Eleven, we're buying a 6-pack where everything is 12 ounces, and I get a lease, and so therefore I'm guaranteed a certain amount of production. That's not how it is. So this bill hikes the costs on developing federal land, particularly in the Western U.S. And ultimately, I think it's going to discourage drilling in those areas because it has such a disparate impact on the small producers. The small guys, the really small companies, are the ones who take all of that risk right up front to begin the development. And the rest of the industry waits and see if they're successful. And then they have this tendency to swoop in and say, hey, let's partner, let's build out. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest impacts. And we're going to see that in short order here, because there's so many unfortunate circumstances by which the federal onshore program is now rendered largely uncompetitive and not particularly enticing to do work. And that's everything from the increased royalty rates to basically the expressions of interest and how things get going. So
explain this expressions of interest provision that's in this bill.
Yeah,
that's a very obscure thing that you're the only one I've seen actually talking about. So
well, and I appreciate that. I mean, Kathleen Sagama, my counterpart at Western Energy Alliance, she points this out as well, because our two trades are the ones who do most of the federal onshore, represent those companies. The expression of interest component of the leasing program is probably the least understood. And that is where a company looks at a tract of federal land, of BLM land usually, and says, you know what, I think based on a hunch and an educated guess, I think that might have opportunity for energy development. And the BLM leases in 2,500 acre blocks. Okay. And so an expression of interest is where I reach out to the local field office and I say, I think we are interested in this. We're expressing the interest in it. And I'd like for you to consider this in the next leasing round or one of the eventual leasing rounds. And then I pay a fee to do that. It's about $2 an acre. Okay. So, you know, for small companies, writing a $5,000 check may or may, you know, it's a gamble, it's a risk. There's no guarantee of anything. There's no guarantee that BLM will actually do that. They'll put in a leasing program. There's no guarantee that if they do that, that they'll actually be available for leasing. And there's certainly no guarantee that I'll be able to obtain the lease if I was the one who did the expression of interest. What this bill does is it raises that to 10 acres. And so all of a sudden my costs go from maybe $10,000 to get a parcel, a couple parcels nominated, to $30,000 or $40,000, and that then increases the risk and makes it less enticing.
Okay. Well, you know, the other thing I want to ask you about is this methane fee. Here at the front of the show, I know there were changes made to it from what it looked like in the Build Back Better legislation that thankfully was killed, but it's still not a great thing for either the industry or consumers, right?
Yeah, this is where the great unknown is, you know, and just like Sarp and his company deals with the uncertainties going forward also. The bottom line is the bill allows the EPA to impose a charge on methane emissions for facilities that report more than 25,000 metric tons each year. And that fee per ton goes from $900 to $1,500 by 2026. The problem is there's very little clarity how this fee is going to work. EPA itself says we have no idea how this is going to work. We don't know how to administer it. And it applies to companies reporting greenhouse gas emissions under certain thresholds. But the problem is that it's doing it under a rule that has yet to be completed, actually yet to be, to be written. And then you overlay the state implementation plans on top of that. And so the industry is going to find itself here paying fees and on an accelerated fee process adjusted each year under rules or requirements that are murky at best with a rule that has yet to be put into place. There's this distinct lack of clarity of what those thresholds are going to be and when they'll be in place. It's really problematic. It also, frankly, from industry's perspective, we're all over the map on it. It's with the legislation putting that threshold of 25,000 or under, but then adding subsidies in it. You know, small companies are going, I don't know how this applies to me. The bigger companies are saying, we've already factored this in. And the big companies are saying, this makes us look really good on ESG issues. So it's going to be a mess.
Yeah. Well, no surprise there, I guess. Sarp, back to you. I want to ask you about this corporate minimum tax concept that's in the bill. You know, I know Enverus is a corporation. I think Enverus is a corporation. Yeah, you're obviously a corporation. And of course, most oil producers are corporations. Mm-hmm. How do you see that impacting the oil and gas industry? One thing I'm curious about is do the provisions of it discriminate against the kinds of deductions that the oil and gas industry is traditionally allowed to take when calculating taxes?
Yeah, of course. So if we're thinking about how we usually think about our operations on the oil and gas side and the economics of it, we're always thinking about a group of all of our operations and what it means to our tax rate and what we're willing to pay. It takes into consideration everything from the accelerated depreciation side to losses on those wells and initially, et cetera, right? So it's when we raise that tax level and we put a minimum on it, that means that a lot of the capabilities afforded for us to have those tax break benefits that now the renewable companies are getting in expanded way are being taken away from the traditional energy side of things. So again, it is the stick side, as Tim put it, of the scenario.
Well, and that brings me, of course, to the part of the bill, and I want to give you both a chance to comment on it because Enverus has hundreds of thousands of or thousands of clients in the energy space, and Tim has all these members in the industry. 87,000 new IRS agents and basically a doubling of the IRS budget. I just wonder if y'all are hearing from your stakeholders concerns about the kind of burden that's going to place on them, just in terms of compliance and having to deal with what I think is inevitably going to be a flood of new audits and enforcement actions from that agency. Are either of y'all hearing about that so far?
So, yeah, I mean, I'll jump in on that. The real challenge is there's this business tax provision where the pass-through loss limitations were put in place. Those provisions are going to have a real impact on the small producers and the hundreds of new LLCs that are created each year in our industry. No company springs out of earth eternal, and becomes a publicly traded company. Virtually every idea starts as a group of guys like us putting together and say, let's go take a bet. And we form ourselves as a master limited partnership or an LLC. And so many of those companies are in early stages and organized as partnerships. All of a sudden, you got 87,000 IRS agents, which are, you can only audit 400 billionaires so many times per year, right? So obviously they're going to look at everybody who has that $400,000 or less, despite what the White House yet said yesterday, which is total bullcrap. We know that. And these new companies are going to be struggling to take foot and become profitable with a goal to eventually employ hundreds of people, but they're going to get hit with tens of billions of dollars in new taxes in this very early and those most financially unstable stages. And then the auditing process is going to hit us on top of that. So yeah, David, I think this is a worst case scenario for new innovation in industry.
Yeah, and from my perspective, when we look at it, I wonder if 87,000 will be enough with all the different rules and things that they put into place to be able to even run this operation. Because one of the most interesting pieces of this legislation is the transferability portion of these tax credits on the renewable side, which means that now you can actually sell your tax credits without having to be in a tax equity partnership. So this transferability is actually going to create a market for tax credits, which means all of a sudden we're going to be selling these tax credits that we acquired for less than 100 cents on the dollar. So the tax credits that we're giving people are going to become less valuable on this market. Also, this accelerated depreciation part that you could monetize in the tax equity market can't be monetized through that transferability. So that's going to be an issue. So tax equity market's still going to exist. So now you got two markets, and the agreement that you have to put in place to even transfer these credits will include a bunch of provisions. And now people are going to be trying to struggle to understand what has actually been transferred. If the transfer of credits is above a certain amount that you actually did get, because there are some production tax credits, now you have to pay a fine on top of that. So people have to monitor that. So although the thought with this transferability thing was that it would simplify these tax equity structures and expand the potential investors, honestly, there's a lot of pitfalls in this. So a lot more ambiguity again has been put into that space, and this market for transferability is going to be a messy one at the very least.
So that all goes right back to what Tim said earlier about this bill, the overall impact of this bill, basically making federal, really the whole United States energy industry less competitive, right? And here we are in the middle of an energy crisis, and this is what Congress is doing. And I write a lot about, just relating about the things I write at Forbes and other places, is one of the worst things to me that this administration and now this Congress have done is really reduce confidence investors can have in investing in energy projects here in the United States. And I just wonder if y'all agree to that kind of, with that general proposition.
Yeah, I mean, I'll wax philosophical here for a minute on a couple things.
Oh, I love it when you do that.
Based on my 30 years in Washington, I think this bill is a perfect example of a couple things. One, going back to my early college days, my mentor in economics said, look, Tim, there's two types of people in the world. There's the producers and the looters. And this really does sort of allow for, as Sarp was just saying, you're gonna get these extended daisy chains of people who will never produce actually anything, but they'll certainly profit from the chain itself, And the second thing, honestly, is the federal government is only good. It really is only good at one thing, which is rewarding failure over and over again. If you say to me, Tim, go build me an aircraft, go build me an aircraft carrier, a fighter, and I'll give you $10 billion. And you come back and say, okay, where's my fighter? I'd say, like, I can't do it. Give me another 5 billion and I'll do it. Okay, they do it. It's the same thing here, which is, we've got a very, very profitable, economically sound and efficient energy system based on fossil fuels, which has been functioning for decades and decades. And we know how to do that. And we've got an emerging renewable industry, which still is not sustainable. And so we are propping them up for another 10 years and those subsidies will never go away. We know that. So the federal government continues to provide the incentives on the failing side. That's what's so frustrating about this.
Right.
I'm sorry, I keep going, but the methane fee is a perfect example. They put together this incredibly complex regulatory and financial system where industry is punished for doing something. The simplest thing could have been able to do is come back and say, okay, we'll give you a tax credit, capture your methane, report what that is, we'll give you credit instead. Been the simplest thing, but now it's completely on its head.
Yeah.
Sorry, you got me going on my soapbox.
Let me jump in here for just a sec. We've got about 5 more minutes on this, but I want to really get in. And this gentleman kicked out a kind of a cool note, and I believe his name's Tim, and he actually knows what he's talking about. I'm just going to read this paragraph, and then I'm going to ask Sarp to go through. We'll ask Tim, and then David, you're going to wrap us up with the final word. Another issue is, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, the bill will increase taxes across every tax bracket. And by 2130, those earning below 400,000 are projected to bear 2/3 of the burden additional tax revenue collected that year. Who is supposed to help increasing taxes if we're close to a recession? Well, I mean, that was scary. Sarp, what is your last word? It can be either over that question or whatever you think.
And my last word is it is scary, and it does also come with the fact that our electricity costs are also going to be increasing no matter how we look at it from this perspective, because although it makes the cost of wholesale electricity more profitable, it doesn't mean that the electricity that the consumers, end-use consumers like ourselves, get is going to be cheaper, because those subsidies, those things that we need to do to the grid for the utilities to upgrade to be able to allow for these intermittent resources of energy to continue to be added to an already fragile grid, all of those costs get passed on to the consumers. That's how the utility rate works, right? Utility rate base works. So from that perspective, on top of what we just mentioned in that paragraph, there's a double whammy in terms of what's going to happen to the cost of electricity on the non-wholesale market.
Wow. Tim, you're up.
Well, history shows that any regime, when they are about to lose power, has a tendency to raid the treasury. And I think we have to be completely honest here, which is, based on what you just mentioned, who's going to bear the brunt of the costs of this? And who receives all the benefit is primarily, a core group of constituencies who have been on against the oil and gas industry. We have to consider this a raid on the treasury that unfortunately everybody, particularly the poor and the moderate income families who are struggling for American prosperity, for household prosperity, they're going to bear the costs on this. And it really is unfortunate. Energy, this is the most partisan energy policy that has ever been put in place at this point. And that's unfortunate because energy doesn't need to be a partisan issue. It needs to, it can be bipartisan.
Yeah, and just to close it out, and first, thank you guys for being on the show, and thank you, Stu, so much for serving as a host. To that point, Tim, this is what this bill comes down to, folks, is it's an effort to fund the Green New Deal that was proposed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez 3 years ago, that many estimates had a total price tag of over $90 trillion if you funded everything that was in the Green New Deal. This bill totals up to $730 billion. So it's just a small down payment on what the Democratic Party wants to continue to do in terms of, quote, transitioning our energy space. And if you think the taxes and cost increases in your utility bill from that this particular legislation will inevitably cause you are going to be dire, just wait till the next down payment gets made in a future Congress. And finally, what it shows to me is a theme I write about all the time, which is that we have our energy decisions being made, not just in the United States, but all over the world by the wrong class of people. And the wrong class of people is politicians. And this is what you get when politicians make energy policy. And with that, I am done here, Stu. Are you done too?
I am. And I'll tell you, I had such a great time. We are going to include everybody's material in the show notes. I want to give a shout out to David. You're an industry thought leader. Tim is a leader of one of the oldest organizations that's spreading the knowledge and is critical. And Sarp, as a VP for Enverus, we just love all of you guys and thank you all very much. This is actually going to try to go out this Friday, and we are just excited for Enverus' sponsorship on this as well too. So thank you guys very much.